Small business entrepreneurship is on the rise in Barbados. From baby boomers to Gen Z, everyone is hustling and hard. But it's important to scale from micro enterprises to small and medium sized enterprises. In this episode, we're having a conversation with the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados, Dr. Lynette Holder. She shares many valuable insights. This is One on One. I'm Mishran Robinson. Good evening to all of you across TV land. This evening, we are joined by Dr. Lynette Holder, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados, on this edition of One on One. Dr. Holder, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are most welcome. You wear many hats, but this evening, we're focusing on where you're positioned uniquely as the sitting CEO of the Small Business Association. Would you say from where you sit that we're seeing a rise of more small businesses in Barbados? And why do you think that is, this interest in entrepreneurship locally?
Well, I'll say to you that first of all, it is a pleasure to be on this program. And you're talking about a subject that's obviously very dear to my heart. For some time now, we've been doing some research, analyzing the trends, the movements, what's happening in the sector. And yes, at the end of the last national survey on the MSME sector, we've seen some movement. We've seen some growth, quantitative growth in the number of firms registered in the last 5 years. Let's use that as a benchmark. And that, we think, argues well for the advocacy work of the association, the education that we are seeing in the sector, not only the SBA, our stakeholders at large. We have in the ecosystem a number of business support organizations, special interest groups, and we've been working to elevate entrepreneurship in the minds and aspirations of people, and we think that is translating to increased interest and the increased registrations that we've seen, particularly in the last 5 years. So yes, there's been some positive movement.
You've experienced a decade of transformation as well, pivoting from what you're seeing in terms of this growth of small businesses. But from 2016 up until this very day in 2026, you've seen some shifts in terms of the dynamics within the last 10 years. Why do you think that is?
Yes. And let me put it in context. 10 years ago, the organization, through the Ministry of Labor and financial support provided by the European Union at the time, undertook a national survey. Now, it was the first time that we've had this body of work. It was a national survey on the sector because we wanted to move away from anecdotal information, pontificating about the size of the sector, the contribution to employment, GDP, and all that, and have data. And so that study gave us quantitative and qualitative information on the sector. It answered a number of those questions. It gave us variables on, as I said, contribution to the employment, GDP, the export rate of MSME participation of firms by gender and all that. Fast track now 10 years after, because during that period, as you could appreciate, the world, it would appear, went through a number of catastrophes and challenges. We've had, the global supply chain disruptions and all that. So fast track, and 10 years after.
Yeah.
And we are very pleased that IADB came on board, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Central Bank of Barbados, and they helped us to undertake a new study. And that information, we obviously still analyzing it as we speak, because we only published last week. But that information, gave us some data on, yes, the numbers, what firms are saying about their journey and all that. And I will admit, we've had, a kind of mixed feelings about it. Because on the one hand, we've seen the increase in the number of female-owned businesses. In 2016, the number of female-owned or female-dominant firms were 34% of the sector. The formal sector we're talking about here. And 10 years after, the number of female-owned, female-dominant firms are 40%. So we've seen a significant increase, about 6 percentage points increase in the number of female-owned, female-dominant businesses. That argues well, we believe, for the sector. Today, firms are struggling. If I can use that term very bluntly.
Cash strapped.
Cash trap, right? Vulnerable, yes. Very challenged. The margins are very, 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 very slim. More than 50%, about 53% of firms reported that their revenues are actually under $100,000. And the mere fact that we're seeing from the data that firms are actually struggling, they're challenged with their revenues, they're challenged with profitability, they're challenged with their growth margins, that this presents another challenge in being able to build resilience and capacity that we want our firms to have to be able to address any exogenous shocks, to be able to withstand climatic events, climate change, and the like.
So creativity alone is not enough. What can be done to address these challenges with the firms that you're making reference to?
Yes. Well, I mean, in addition to the quantitative information, we did have some qualitative data that came out of focus groups held during the period. And the discussions or the thematic areas indicate some policy interventions that are needed to help firms to build capacity. About 3 key points came out of that qualitative information. Firms are experiencing a shortage of labor. Firms are experiencing, 10 years after, highly bureaucratic structures and bureaucratic systems that obviously affect their ability to do business. We've been talking for how long now about business facilitation. So we're seeing a shortage of labor. We're seeing, bureaucratic structures and systems. And the third area that came out of the qualitative aspect of the report was financial constraints. I mean, I've been talking, I believe now, for close to 20 years about access to finance issues. And sometimes people, think, oh, you're a stuck record. But the truth is, it continues to be a perennial issue for MSMEs. And that was borne out by the research where firms recognize that financing and access to financing, the availability of the right kind of financial products is an issue and an impediment to growth. And we think that based on firms' inability to access the kind of financial resources that they need, they are unable to build capacity. So the research not only looked at the impact of climatic events, the research looked at digital adoption, firms in a position where they can transform their business models to using one that is driven by digitalization. Again, the data says financial constraints represent a significant impediment to firms adopting the technology, moving not just to AI. We've not even gotten theirs yet because only about less than 10% of firms indicated that they're currently using AI. A significant percentage, yes, said they want to in the next 12 months. But even before we get there, simple technological tools that will improve your business operations and make your businesses more efficient. Firms identified these were, challenging to adopt because of financial concerns. Yes, education was another one. Cybersecurity concerns and so on came up in the conversation. But at the top of the list, financial constraints.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Holder, considering all that you've mentioned, Barbados has signed on to some bilateral agreements with 3 Caribbean territories, Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. How important is it for some of our small entrepreneurs to think outside of the domestic market?
Yes, and you're talking about the internationalization strategy of businesses to obviously go beyond your domestic market.
Yes.
Now, the data showed, 2016, it was the same. 2026, fast forward 10 years, is the same. Our private sector is primarily domesticated, right? And when I say domesticated, it has a domestic focus. It caters primarily to the
The
domestic market.
locals.
And back then, when we looked at the percentage of firms exporting, it was around 6% of formal businesses, formal MSMEs. 10 years after, it ticked up just 2 percentage points. 8% of formal enterprises are actually exporting. And so from then, we've been saying, look, we need to
8%
consider
of
8%.
enterprises are actually exporting.
8% of MSMEs are actually exporting, right? So 2 percentage points, you may say, all right, marginal, and this is why we define the sector as primarily focused on the domestic market. Matter of fact, I believe the former professor Owen Arthur used to say this all the time, that our private sector is primarily inwardly focused and domestically focused, and that is borne out in the research. Now it is obviously too early to assess the agreement signed by Barbados, Dominica, Belize, etc., relative to the free movement of persons. But that is a step in the right direction. We've always argued that the CSME, the single market and economy, represents the low hanging fruit. And so when we assess those that are exporting, the 8%, right? The majority of them are actually exporting, yes, within the OECS sub-region, and this is good because this represents, in our view, that low-hanging fruit for firms to be able to internationalize, to export their goods and services. But 8% is not enough, and we are of the view that you really cannot see the kind of growth that is required for your firm in a market of 280,000.
Yes.
And that is why the CSME was so important. But then the CSME itself has challenges. And we did a piece on that because CSME would have celebrated 20 years since the signing. I think about 20 years ago we wrote a piece on this in another section of the press. 20 years on, where are we? The single economy is not even on the table, and we still have not been able to get all the CARICOM member states to sign on to the single market component and the free movement, as those few countries that we mentioned earlier would have done. And so this represents an opportunity that is not being maximized. Yeah. The single market and single economy, in our view, is an opportunity for our firms to be able to export. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what are the policy interventions that we need to put in place to facilitate, to get our firms to pivot, right? Yes, we are domesticated, we're inwardly focused, yes, but we need now to go beyond the Barbadian shores. And our data in this research is showing what are some of those policy interventions that we can look at beyond just signing various bilaterals and putting those trade agreements in place. We have to build capacity of our businesses. I go back to that point, constantly. Building capacity of our MSME sector is going to be critical to the next wave of growth and transformation that we wish to see in our MSME sector.
And what we hope for progressive policy, Dr. Holder, what does that capacity building look like, or what should it look like?
Well, beyond having the agreements, I mean, we really appreciate, yes, our government through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade will sign those agreements. But let me give a simple example. Access to finance, the right kind of financing, trade financing, to be able to allow firms, to access for the purchase of their raw materials, the purchase of equipment and so on. That's key. So when it comes to export import financial institutions, we have to look at, are we going to have a regional platform for this, or do we look at accessing those that are already in the space? But for sure, we need trade financing. We have many examples of businesses that have, gone to a trade mission here or there, and were able to establish an opportunity to export particular goods, usually condiments, those kind of the food and beverage and so on. But when they come back to Barbados, they experience the proverbial challenge of being able to meet those orders, right? Either they can't procure the equipment, be it bottle caps, or the actual raw materials for, let's use the very common item of pepper sauce. So they can't find the pepper mash or the other ingredients. And then there's the packaging of the items in a consistent vein, and the quality that is required to meet the particular overseas market, and to be able to produce the volumes to meet those markets. Now, we're talking sometimes about supermarket chains that are not interested in just a half a container every quarter, but they maybe want one or two containers every month. And those firms are unable to meet the demand, to meet the particular order from those customers, because of the inability to finance the inputs, finance the materials, the inability, to produce the volumes that are needed. And then you have what is known in the trade space, the technical barriers to trade, the issue with labeling and packaging, and not being able oftentimes to meet the sanitary and phytosanitary conditions to enter those export markets. So there are a number of issues that we need to focus on relative to getting our businesses export ready.
Dr. Holder, I really want us to continue on this trajectory, but we're going to pause for a short commercial break, and we'll continue this, but also look at women in business, the amount of SMEs that are female-led, female-owned, and also some of the hopes for digital transformation as well. We'll be continuing this conversation with the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados, Dr. Lynette Holder. Feel free to stay with us.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Danielle Reed-Mulilo, and I'm a general physician. Today we're going to have a casual talk about chlamydia and gonorrhea. Chlamydia and gonorrhea are both curable STDs and are spread by oral, vaginal, and anal sex. Both can cause discharges from infective orifices or no symptoms at all. Discharges can be yellow, green, or bloody. Both are easily treated with antibiotics by your doctor. If left untreated, they can cause infertility, so use protection and get tested today.
Hello to you, and welcome back to this edition of One-on-One. We're having a conversation with the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados, Dr. Lynette Holder. Dr. Holder, we were continuing on that whole conversation of exports and some of the logistical challenges being faced. But in looking back at the past decade, from 2016 to up until this very current point, would you say it was characterized by one of growth, or would you say it's one of forced adaptation? And we're still looking at exports as well.
Well, for me, it's bittersweet when I look at the data, because in 2016, the information says that about 6% of our formal MSMEs were exporting. Fast track, 10 years after, 8% of formal MSMEs are exporting.
Yes.
So we've seen a 2% growth.
Yeah.
So, someone would say, well, okay, you've seen some growth. Why I say it is bittersweet is because, truth be told, that is too limited, a percentage growth in my view. I would suspect in our view, what we would want to see for the sector, and so when we poll persons to find out, well, what are the markets? Yes, the CARICOM single market economy comes to mind. We're seeing that of that 8%, the majority of those firms are actually exporting to the CSME. And might I say by extension, CARICOM, because as you know, the Bahamas is not a signatory to the CSME. So yes, the CARICOM market represents that low-hanging fruit. So that is maybe what was the intention really of signing on to the CSME in the first place. But we're seeing that firms are not really adopting an export strategy as a key part of their business model. Because of those persons who are exporting, less than 10% of their revenue for the entire business is actually from exports of goods and services. So they're not internationalizing as a strategic part of the business growth and business development as we would like to see. So exporting, yes, is being done by a small percentage, but the revenue from export is really a drop in the bucket. It is a very small percentage of overall revenue of the firm, and they've cited issues with not sometimes getting the support from the embassies or the missions that are in the various territories, so they're not organizing the kinds of trade missions or providing market intelligence, export information that will help.
Yeah.
They're unable to access the kind of trade financing that will help them to focus specifically on pivoting to these various countries and adopting that internationalization strategy. They're not able to put in place the kind of phytosanitary and sanitary requirements that the various export regimes require. And though we have a facility here, a government facility here in Newton that is intended to assist with that, unfortunately, not enough, especially at the small and micro level firm, not enough of these firms are using that facility to help build capacity. So that is obviously an opportunity for us to work with Export Barbados to make sure that we can get more of our agribusinesses using that facility to, mass produce the product to be able to export. As you know, these supermarket chains in Europe, they're not looking for half a container every quarter. They want to be able to get containers coming in monthly. And sometimes, and therefore, firms must be able to have the capacity to be able to cater to those high demands.
Mm-hmm. And part of that would be related to scale and the fact that we are small island developing states. It's a foreign comparison.
Well, scale in the sense that our firms have to build capacity that they can meet the demands, and we have a challenge with that right now. Our private sector, especially at the MSME level, is primarily domestic in focus. Serving our small market here of 280,000 people. Yes. That is not sustainable. If it is that we want to grow the sector, we want to contribute to, foreign exchange earnings, we want to have firms that can internationalize and so on, we have to be able to go beyond. So we have to build capacity to be able to scale. Yes. Now, the data also shows, based on your question about women, your data also shows that while we saw an increase in the number of female-owned, female-dominant firms from 34% in 2016 to 40%, if we can say 40.1% in 2026, the majority of these female-owned, female-dominant businesses are at the micro level. So that's why I said it is bittersweet. Yes, a 6 percentage point increase in the number of women-owned businesses, but they are operating primarily at the micro level. Now, the survey used the definitions of micro, small, and medium based on the Ministry of Energy and Business Development's amended policy document. So we know that a micro firm, small and medium and so on, meet a particular definition. So when we look at that, we're talking about, less than 5 employees on average, 500,000 in annual revenue and so on. So these are micro businesses, primarily female
Yes.
owned, female dominant, but they are at that level and they're not scaling. They're not pivoting. So the data shows from 2016 and now that whereas we've seen a significant growth in women-owned businesses, especially in the last 5 years, I'll come back to maybe why that was the case based on the data, they are not scaling to small and medium. And that is a cause for concern. That means that there's some significant policy interventions that we have to look at to get our women-owned businesses to grow. Now, as you could appreciate, women often have a much difficult time, a more difficult time maybe, in accessing finance as male-owned and male-dominant firms do. So that could be an issue why they are not scaling. The women, as you know, have the dual responsibilities, not only of managing the business, but also other household responsibilities, taking care of children, the elderly in the home, and that kind of thing. So these issues could easily impact on women's ability to go to the next level in the operations. But for sure, the data demonstrates to us that whereas we've seen that 6% increase in women-owned and women-dominant firms, of all of the women businesses that exist, 82% of them are at the micro level. Now that is a significant percentage, and it tells us when we look across the data, when we look at the data set, there's not that concomitant
Yes.
growth in operations.
And will you make mention of these simultaneous challenges that female businesses are faced with in terms of not breaking that glass ceiling to go on to own small and medium-sized enterprises? How is the Small Business Association seeking to develop and assist some of the women that might be within this Barbadian domestic market to really scale and pursue within the entrepreneurial space?
Partnerships. Let me use that term.
Collaborations.
Partnerships, critical to the work of the association. So even prior to the publishing of this report, we've been collaborating with organizations like the Bureau of Gender Affairs, for example, within the Ministry of People Empowerment, to focus in specifically on capacity building, training workshops for women in business, helping them not only to understand entrepreneurship and what is involved, but also project proposal writing so they can access financing to build projects that they can scale their operations. So partnerships are critical. The Inter-American Development Bank, as you know, is a key financier of the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Fund, which is being administered by the Central Bank of Barbados. And that third iteration of the fund seeks to set aside 18% of the funding for women-owned businesses. That, again, is going to help firms, women-owned, women-dominant firms, to be able to access financial resources that they can pivot, that they can scale, right? So providing financial resources, then providing technical resources through training, workshops, through building capacity and so on, are key steps that we've been engaged in as an association to help those women. And also, from a policy perspective, we're strongly advocating that where possible, we can set aside resources for female-owned businesses that, will help. Yes, someone will say, oh, you're talking about quotas. But yes, there's nothing wrong with quotas. There's nothing wrong if you have vulnerable groups in a community and you want to, enfranchise those groups, you want to lift those groups up, to set aside quotas for them that, they can access, that they can build capacity. And so our view is that when it comes to, for example, government procurement and the procurement legislation, we've been advocating, look, set aside a percentage of this for women-owned businesses, because what it does is that it helps them to build capacity. If they can get contracts, they can provide services, they can provide goods to a kind of a ready market. It helps them to build capacity. I say oftentimes, look, a business needs to focus on 3 M's, 3 critical M's: money, management, which is your skills, and markets. Money management, markets. All right. So you need to access financing. You need to build your skills and competencies and so on. But then you need markets, because you need to be able to sell your goods and or services to consumers. Right. So if we can focus on these 3 pillars, and this has been the strategic intent of the SBA, focus on these 3 pillars. Help our women-owned businesses to access money, help them to access financing, help them to, build skills through, management tools and so on. And then thirdly, help them to access markets that they can scale, they can grow.
In terms of building capacity for these women, do you see it as important for women in terms of scaling their businesses to be educated at a particular level, or do you feel as if it can come from, learning on the job as they go along?
In our programming here in the association, whenever I talk to members, I often tell them, look, you cannot take anyone beyond your own capacity. It's a term that members will tell you that I use quite a bit in our orientation sessions, training sessions, and so on.
Yes.
Right? It's difficult for you to take anyone beyond your own capacity. And this is why even as a personal goal of mine, constantly improving your skills, learning, and so on, right? And yes, you can learn on the job in some instances, but you have to be intentional about your growth, intentional about your development. And this is why we have programs, and we partner with others to execute programs that will help women to build skills, right? The Caribbean Development Bank, for example, has the She Trades program that the SBA has been promoting and so on. ICA, again, focus on agriculture, yes, but women in agriculture. All of these are partners that have platforms that look at training, building capacity for women in business. You must be intentional about developing your skills. You can't leave it to chance.
The second question that I wanted to pivot to as well, having asked that one, in terms of the businesses that women are focused on, is it a case of women in cosmetology? Is it a case of women in agriculture? What are the focus for some of these women in business?
Right. So the survey showed services was the number one area. And you may say, well, okay, what do you mean by that? The data divided the sectors into 3 broad categories. Yes, within each category, you had subsectors, but 3 broad categories. There was agriculture, there was industry, which looked at, like construction, quarrying, manufacturing, and so on, and then services. Services included professional services, personal care, and all that. And not only did we see the majority of women-owned businesses as micro firms, but the majority of women-owned businesses were in services. To a lesser extent, agriculture, but services was the primary area. And we understand that, because we talk about services, we're talking about personal services, professional services, business advisory services, accounting, and the like. So the services area was identified as where the majority of our women-owned, women-dominant businesses operated, and to some extent, that's understood and that's expected. But what we want to see is that they're able to move from micro to small and medium, that they can scale. That is our concern as an association, that they're just hovering right there at the micro level.
And the link, in your opinion, would be capacity building in terms of scaling.
The ability to scale those 3 M's would include being able to access the financial resources to do so, being able to access your markets to do so, and being able to have the skills and the know-how, the ability to do so. I was in a forum some time ago. Financiers, primarily lots of men. It's because that the data shows that the majority of our companies, yes, are male owned, male dominant, and we understand that. But these are financiers, and I made the point to them that the data, this is not what Lynette Holder is saying, the data says that women represent a better credit. What do I mean by that? You have lower NPL, non-performing loans, with women as borrowers than you have as men.
Why would that
so
be?
if because women, based on I can only speak now anecdotally because we didn't research this one,
Right.
but women tend to be more disciplined, more industrious. And that maybe goes back to our socialization, as from our moms and grandmothers and great grands and aunts and so on. They're better savers, they're better managers of the monetary resources. So when it comes to accessing credit, they represent a better underwriting opportunity for that institution, a better loan on the books. They pay back,
Yes.
a lot better than their male counterparts. So I'm saying to these financial managers, but if they represent better credit for financial institutions, then why are you not jumping to offer them
The credit.
the
Yes,
credit, to
yes.
offer them the loans? To me, it's a fait accompli. It's a common sense issue. They're better credit. Go after women and in a strategic way with your loan products. But we know that proverbial song, right? It's a man's world. Still. So that means there's still much to be done relative to that glass ceiling and breaking that for women, not only in the workplace, but in business by extension.
Dr. Holder, important points that you've mentioned. We're going to pivot to future proofing and resilience when we come back, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
We'll be right back with more of this conversation with Dr. Lynette Holder. She's the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados. I'm sure you'd want to stay with us.
Hi, I am Corey Springer. I am the founder and chairman of the board of directors of the HURT Initiative, Barbados registered charity 1419. We were established in February of 2019, but we started operations 6 years prior, and our mission statement is to reach underprivileged families, bridging the gap between those who have not, especially at times of year when we as a community tend not to think about people who do not have. We like to emphasize healthy groceries. So one thing we do is provide 1 to 2 weeks of healthy groceries to impoverished families. If you're looking for us, you can find us on social media, IG in particular, at Help Us Reach Them. Bless.
Welcome back to this edition of One-on-One. We're continuing this conversation, an important conversation with CEO of the Small Business Association, Dr. Lynette Holder. Dr. Holder, we wanted to follow up on some of those factors that would have played in the difficulties of change within the last 5 years where small businesses are concerned, the COVID-19 pandemic, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're correct. We actually located this second study within that context of the international and even domestic business environment, right? And so we have the view that some of the data that we've seen may very well have been influenced by what was happening in the environment. Now, COVID-19 has had such a deleterious impact on the business community that 6 years after, small firms are still struggling to recover. The research actually showed that close to 2/3 of our firms that were polled indicated that they either had to close or restructure their operations. We're not just talking about those that had to close because of mandatory dictates. We're talking about firms who, because of the loss of consumer support financing and so on, that they couldn't compete, and so they had to close and or reorganize, restructure their enterprises. So COVID-19, and then we had a plethora of climatic events, the ashfall, we had, yes, we had the storms and so on, and not to mention the global supply chain disruptions that
because of
we've
the
seen.
ongoing wars.
So I tell you, the last 5 years in business have been so traumatic and catastrophic on our business community, that it really called for the average firm to really rethink and refocus how they're going to survive. And so this study indicated in the preamble that businesses were actually in survival mode for the better part of that last 5 years. And it's a fact. So they weren't able to pivot to growth. The focus was on surviving. And God forbid that we see a continuation of these wars in the next 2-3 years, and the concomitant impact on the supply chains, that these are going to again have that impact on our small business sector.
Interestingly enough, you also alluded to the fact that only 8% of businesses said that they're ready or well prepared in terms of future proofing and resilience.
Well, yes, we talked about firms that have that business continuity, business continuity plans and so on, because we want to get a sense from the sample, from those polled, how resilient are they to these exogenous shocks. And you're right, just about 8% said that they actually had business continuity plans. They have the business insurance, they have buffers in place. 62% said that they had no plans at all. That's close to 2/3 said they had no plans at all for building resilience for the future. And that again, I mean, it's an opportunity for us to help them to put those plans in place, but it is obviously a cause for concern, because it says, as I said, God forbid something happens in the next 6 months, a lot of these small and micro firms in particular will suffer.
What is your hope play in terms of filling that void where the digital divide is concerned to help these firms future-proof?
Yes, and digitalization, again, another area that we pulled, because we wanted to get a sense of if our businesses were ready. You know that the Central Bank of Barbados is going to be launching BIMPay in June, and that helped to inform, what we wanted to pull there. And again, 79% of firms are using the social media platforms to promote their products and services. That's good, but the digital, the technological tools and so on that they should be using in their firms, just about 1/3 of businesses have actually committed to are actually using those digital tools. When it comes to AI, just 8% said that they're actually using AI, but 43% said that they plan to in the next 12 months. So that's at least a good sign. But we're not seeing enough of businesses using, the point of sale systems, and even something as simple as a computer assisted program for the accounting, the accounting work and so on. Not enough firms are using those types of technology. So we still have some work to do when it comes to the use of technology, as maybe being second nature in the business.
Which is what we should be working towards assiduously, because what I'm hearing is, I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the popular influencers and business pages that we know now, those are the elements that would have capitalized on having a digital presence, something that a pandemic cannot destroy, as you're alluding to, Dr. Holder. And something else that I wanted to ask, in terms of those micro enterprises, is there a general encouragement in terms of them scaling to incorporate and take business to another level? I know you've mentioned the capacity building as well.
I mean, we've seen, since COVID-19, that has been a game changer when it comes to technology. That is a fact. We've seen some movement there. As I said, 79% of firms are using the social platforms to get their messages out there. That's good. So and that is in a sense as a result of COVID-19, right? But the meeting platforms, I don't want to call any of the brands, but the meeting platforms, and the technologies to conclude like payments with consumers and so on. We still have some work to do in those areas.
The other question that I want to ask Dr. Holder, you're doing tremendous work where the SBA is concerned. What's the difference between the SBA and what we have now in terms of the Barbados Trust Fund?
Well, Barbados Trust Fund is a financial institution. As you know, it was established in 2019 to be able to provide credit to micro firms, more so. I believe it's 5,000, 10,000 on your second ask, and in the recent budget it was increased to 20,000. So the Barbados Trust Fund Limited is a financial institution, a microfinance institution offering credit to small firms, help them to put that idea into enterprise, as the proverbial saying is. The Small Business Association of Barbados is a membership organization, non-profit, non-governmental organization of firms. So we are a network of businesses, and we are here to advocate on the behalf of the sector, not just our members, on the behalf of the sector, provide training and capacity building so that firms can grow and develop, network with obviously our partners across the ecosystem to be able to bring business solutions to the members and by extension our sector. So we're here to help firms to grow, partner with them so that they can grow. And one of those partners is the Barbados Trust Fund Limited.
What is the interest like from young entrepreneurs in terms of wanting to become members of the Small Business Association? I know a study was done that indicates that a number of Gen Z and Gen Alphas as well, they're interested. There are a number of kid entrepreneurs in Barbados. So can you speak to that?
Again, I go back to partnerships. Truth be told, when we look at our membership base, the average age for us tends to be more, that 35 to 55. So that's the average age, 35 to 55. When you use the UN or any of the other international agencies' definition of young, it's usually under 35. And so we, partner with like the Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. So if you have YES there,
Yes.
or a BYBT, for example, or even SEED at UE, then these agencies that are established specifically for young persons in business, then in our view, it is for the association to partner with them to be able to help enhance their product offerings to the young entrepreneur, right? But they're there specifically to cater to youth in business, and we support that.
Pivoting from that question, Dr. Holder, between the 2019 to 2022 period, which businesses within your ambit proved to be most shock-proof?
In terms of sector,
Yes.
well, the data seems to suggest manufacturing was challenged. So we saw a dip in the number of manufacturing entities. Similarly, agriculture, they were challenged too, even though during COVID they proved to be
Yes.
maybe
Be a
the
tremendous help, yes.
more resilient. But I think services, we've seen from the data a significant increase in the number of services firms, services and entities. Again, bringing home the point that the Barbadian economy is a services economy. And so, you have very little in terms of brick and mortar. So your overheads are usually not as high as industry, which, as I said, is the construction and manufacturing and so on. And as a result, you're able to, maybe pivot a lot easier than the construction, manufacturing, and to a lesser extent, the agriculture sector. So I think services is where we're seeing the growth. and the data brings it out. We're seeing that shift in the services sector, and again, this is where we're seeing more women going, and so it is now for us also to see how we can strengthen them even more. And another quick point maybe we can add here is when we broke out the businesses that are exporting, right? The data actually showed that though you're seeing less firms exporting than the traditional manufacturing, the data suggests that there was a higher yield. In other words, more revenue was being generated from actual export of services than from the traditional industry. So there's clearly potential for the development of a vibrant services sector.
And continuing on this whole conversation surrounding resilience, what's the advice like for businesses from moving to, simply having a cash buffer to decentralizing their supply chain to some degree?
Well, the resilience building needs to include the use of technology. We need to get our businesses to pivot to technological platforms and the digitalization of their operations. That is a given, right? We want to see greater partnerships emerging as well, because the fact is, you can do a lot more when you establish networks, when you're able to partner, and not only partnerships in the domestic space, but we're talking about as you look to internationalize, you can have firms here, services-based firms, even small manufacturing, who can partner with other similar entities in the OECS, in the wider CARICOM region, and so on. So clearly, building partnerships as a key strategy to be able to grow your operations, in our view, is another area alongside of digitalization of your business, looking at the use of technology even more. I mean, and thirdly, I'll add, yes, the research showed that firms weren't seeing any significant margins in their profitability during the period. Actually, about 50% of businesses indicated that they either made a loss or they broke even in the last fiscal period, which was 2024. But we have to look at helping our businesses to put in place those buffers, to create some sort of reserves, in their financials, so that in the event, God forbid, something happens, that they're able to draw on those reserves to help them to finance the operation in the short to medium term.
Oftentimes, for newer entrepreneurs, you reference the importance of collaboration along the way, partnerships and synergies. For some newer enterprises, they come into the market and they think of competition, not necessarily wanting to partner or create those synergies because of, misalignment or a lack of trust. What's your advice to younger entrepreneurs in terms of the importance of creating those synergies, even within the face of competition?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The natural thing is to look at the competition, right? And you're taught that when you're preparing a strategic plan, your strategic plan, your business plan, you look at, you do a comparison analysis and so on to see what's out there and so on. So yes, but we have as one of our 4 pillars as an association, building networks. Actually, it's a key part of our slogan, building networks, creating wealth. Because over time, we've been around now for a little over 4 decades, and our leaders are business persons in themselves, and they've learned along the way that a key strategy in your growth model is to build networks. It's to build networks. It's to network with others, so that yes, you can leverage costs, you can reduce costs when you partner, even to procure certain equipment and so on. But the fact is, partnerships and strategic alliances are key aspects of a growth strategy, right? So we teach that as much as we can to help persons, especially younger persons, to understand. Look, there's a lot of networking that goes on in Barbados when it comes to business. Huh? You might not see it in a formal way. Maybe we have a formal networking, but trust me, every weekend, you have business people meeting at the shops. The traditional foods that we know what they're eating on weekends, and even the sports that they're playing on the weekend and so on, and they're networking, they're discussing partnerships, they're discussing opportunities and so on, because it is a key part of a business development strategy. You must network.
Thank you for having this conversation with us, Dr. Holder. We've come to the end of this one-on-one, but I'm so happy that we've been able to speak with you for you to share your insights and your vision for business in Barbados.
Thank you so much for having me. Really was a pleasure to share.
You're most welcome. We've come to the end of another one-on-one, this edition featuring the CEO of the Small Business Association of Barbados, Dr. Lynette Holder. On behalf of my producer, I'm Miss Shawn Robinson. Until next time.